Now that we have our authentication API set up and working, where a user can log in and log out, we now need to adjust the tasks table in the database so we can add a user ID against each task. This will allow you to assign a task to a user, so when our API calls getTasks, it will have a context of whose tasks it should return. So if we open phpMyAdmin, if we go to the tasks table, you can see currently we've got ID, title, description, deadline and completed. We need to add a new field to store the user ID. So if we go to users and browse, we need to store this ID here. We do this very similar in the sessions table where we store the user ID. So this is how we link tasks to users. So if we go to add one column and we'll just want to add it at the end, so after completed, click go. We'll give it a name of user ID. It was a big int because that's what will store the user ID in the other tables. So if I scroll to big int, and then we move along, and it's mandatory because every task must have a user ID associated with it now. So we're not going to tick the allow nullable, and we're just going to give it a comment. So it'll be user ID of owner of task. I think that's fine. So if I click save on that, go back to structure, and you can see now we've got a user ID. So what we need to do now is to add a foreign key associated with this user ID field. So this basically means that when a task's created or added into the database, it must have a user ID. Now that user ID must exist in TBL users. We did this in the sessions, if you remember rightly. So the user ID, we can't create a session for a rogue user or a user that doesn't have, that doesn't exist. So that's what we're going to do in TBL tasks. So it must be a valid user. But before we do that, what we're going to have to do is delete all of our tasks out of our TBL tasks table. Because if we try and put a foreign key on this, it defaults to 0 for all of our tasks. Now the user with the user ID of 0 doesn't exist. So we want to clear these down. So what we'll do here is within TBL tasks, go to operations, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see empty the table. If we click that, untick enable foreign key checks, and then just click OK. So go back to browse. You can see that our TBL tasks table doesn't have any tasks in there now. So now if we go back to structure, relation view, and then we'll add in our foreign key. So it's task user ID underscore FK for foreign key. On delete restrict, on update restrict, because we don't want to be able to delete a user that still has tasks. So column, we'll select user ID. Database is tasks.db. Table is TBL users, because this is the table that we're linking to. And the column will be ID. So if we click save, that's now added. So if we go back to TBL tasks, go to browse, it's empty. If we try and go to insert, and if we look at the user ID, you can see now that our user's in there. We just have one user at this point. So that shows that the linking between the two tables is working fine. So in the next video, what we need to do is adjust our tasks.php file, which is our task API, to take into account these changes. But also what we're going to have to do is check for access tokens and everything like that. So we'll do the authentication, and then we'll modify each SQL query and each bit of functionality to take into account this user ID. Because at the minute, the way that it's built, it would just return all tasks. It doesn't really matter about the user. It doesn't care whether a user is logged in or not. So obviously we'll update that in the next video.